Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a pretty big topic.
Yeah.
The impact of globalization on education.
Huge topic.
We've got a whole stack of research articles and
Oh, yeah.
some really interesting expert opinions, even a philosophical quote or two.
Always good.
So yeah, we'll try to use all that to
Yeah.
understand just what's going on with this whole globalization of education thing.
Sounds good.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, so first things first.
Okay.
What exactly are we even talking about when we say globalization? Like, what does that even mean? Well, we found this quote from the economist Thomas Friedman,
Okay.
and he describes it as the ability to reach farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before.
Yeah.
But is it really just about economics?
You know, it's tempting to kind of simplify it like that.
Right.
But globalization, it's reaching way beyond just money and economics.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
reshaping culture. It's reshaping technology, even how we view our place in the world, you know. Think about how interconnected we all are now with instant communication,
Yeah.
global supply chains ideas spreading like wildfire online.
Right. Yeah, it's not like everywhere.
It's not like something that's just happening.
Over there.
Right.
It's like all around us.
The water we swim in.
Yeah, exactly. So is it more than just like a historical phase, or some sources we looked at, like Higgett and Reich,
Okay.
they kind of suggested that it's like a whole new way that societies are structured.
Yeah.
Almost like I think they said McDonaldization on a global scale.
Interesting comparison.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely that element of globalization pushing towards like standardization and efficiency
Right.
on a global scale. And
Yeah, and that's kind of like
that raises
from McDonald's thing, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what they were getting at, I think.
Yeah.
But, that brings up another question, which is whose standards are we talking about? Because globalization can sometimes feel like it's just the spread of this one dominant set of ideals.
Right.
And they tend to be Western ideals. And that raises some concerns about, power and whose interests are actually being served by this whole globalization thing.
That's a good point. And that leads us right into education, because we found this article by Rizvi.
Okay.
And he talks about this idea of the new social imaginary, which is basically like the dominant way of thinking about education in this globalized world.
I see.
And he argues that education is increasingly being seen as just like a tool for economic growth.
Right.
With a focus on skills for this global marketplace. Measurable outcomes, standardized testing.
Yeah, the whole shebang.
The drill.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're measuring the success of entire education systems based on how well they produce workers for this global economy.
That's interesting.
Right.
And I think that's where we see things like PISA, that massive international student assessment program.
Yeah.
I mean, countries obsess over their PISA rankings because it's seen as like an indicator of how economically competitive they're going to be.
So a country's PISA score becomes like a proxy for its economic potential.
Basically, yeah.
But is that really the only way to measure a good education system?
Right.
I mean, we came across this quote from an educator named Ernest Boyer.
Okay.
And he argued for a much broader purpose. He emphasized things like respect for life language, aesthetics, history, nature values, connecting learning to real-life experiences, not just economic metrics.
Yeah, it seems like there's this tension there between, viewing education as primarily for economic growth versus seeing it as having like intrinsic value beyond just the marketplace.
Yeah, so how do we define the purpose of education in this complex globalized world?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, we found this paper by the philosopher Ingrid Robbins.
Okay.
And she kind of breaks down the purpose of education into these 4 key roles.
Okay.
And the first one is the intrinsic importance of learning just for its own sake. The joy of discovery, expanding your knowledge just because you're fascinated by something.
Absolutely. Like someone learning ancient Greek just because they love the language.
Right, exactly. Not because they think it's going to help them get a job or anything.
Right.
Just for the love of it.
Yeah.
And then there's the instrumental personal economic role, which is how education equips people for the job market, helps them earn a living, make informed financial decisions.
Right. Things like learning to code so you can become a software developer or studying personal finance so you can manage your money wisely.
Right. Practical skills.
Yeah.
And then there's the instrumental economic role on a larger scale, which is how education contributes to a nation's economic development.
Right.
So things like STEM education, vocational training, research and development.
Yeah. It's like investing in your nation's brain power, so to speak.
Right.
To compete in this global knowledge economy.
Exactly. And then finally, there's the non-economic instrumental role, which encompasses personal and societal benefits that go beyond just economics.
Interesting.
So things like education for informed citizenship, critical thinking, understanding different cultures, promoting tolerance and empathy.
Right. It's about educating people to be active and engaged members of a complex, interconnected world.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings us to 3 specific models of education that kind of capture these different roles.
Right.
Education as human, capital education as a right.
Okay.
And education as capability.
Okay, I'm familiar with those.
So let's start with human capital. This is probably the one that most people are familiar with.
Right.
It's basically viewing education as an investment that will yield economic returns. So you develop skills and knowledge to boost your productivity and contribute to economic growth.
Right. The classic idea that you go to school, you get a degree, you get a better job.
Right.
You contribute more to the economy.
It's like investing in any other form of capital, right?
Exactly.
But it leads to greater output and economic prosperity.
Right. But it's not without its critics, though.
Right, because it kind of reduces individuals to just their economic potential.
Oh, I got it.
Like they're just cogs in this giant economic machine.
Like, what about the non-economic benefits of education?
Yeah.
Things like personal growth, creativity, critical thinking, social responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, that model really struggles to account for all those things.
So it's a bit one-dimensional.
Yeah, you can say that.
So then we have the education as a right model.
Right.
This one emphasizes that everyone has a fundamental right to education, regardless of their background or economic potential.
Makes sense.
And this is actually enshrined in numerous international declarations.
It is.
But realizing that right in practice is a whole other challenge.
Because access doesn't automatically mean quality, right?
Exactly.
And then you also have the question of, you know, who decides what constitutes a right to education?
Right.
Like, is it just access to any kind of education? Or does it imply a certain quality, a certain duration-specific content?
All good questions. And that's where the third model comes in, education as capability.
Okay. Yeah, this one's interesting.
It shifts the focus from inputs and outputs to the actual impact of education on people's lives.
Okay.
And their ability to live meaningful lives.
So it's not just about what you learn, but what you're able to do with that knowledge.
Exactly.
I like that.
It's about empowering people to develop their capabilities, their real freedoms to be and do what they value.
That's a good way to put it.
Let me give you an example. Think about literacy for women.
Okay.
From a human capital perspective, that's all about economic empowerment, right?
Right. Increasing their earning potential, that kind of thing.
But from a capability perspective, literacy is about so much more than just getting a job.
Right.
It's about empowering women to access information, to communicate effectively, to participate in decision-making, to challenge social norms, and ultimately to have more control over their own lives.
So it's about expanding choices and opportunities, not just their economic potential.
Exactly.
I see.
So the capability approach tries to bridge that gap between the intrinsic and instrumental values of education. It recognizes both its inherent worth and its potential to empower people and transform societies.
That's a really cool model.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff.
It is.
But I'm also curious, like, how do we move from theory to practice?
Right.
How do we actually shift the balance in education policy and practice towards this more holistic, capability-focused approach?
Yeah, is there like a roadmap for that?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals.
Sounds good.
They offer a really interesting framework for a more equitable and sustainable future for everyone.
Okay.
And education is at the heart of that vision.
All right, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting.
I think so too.
Okay, so we've been talking about this need for like a more holistic approach to education.
Right.
One that goes beyond just economic metrics and, you know, all that.
Yeah.
So where do the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, fit into all of this?
Right, the SDGs.
They seem to get a lot of attention these days.
Yeah, they're a really powerful framework for global action, you know.
Yeah.
It's like a to-do list for humanity.
Okay.
Addressing all these interconnected challenges from poverty and hunger to climate change and inequality.
Right, right.
And education, specifically SDG number 4, is like right at the heart of that agenda.
So what does SDG 4 actually entail? Like, what's the vision for education in this whole context of sustainable development?
So SDG 4, it focuses on ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education.
Okay.
And promoting lifelong learning opportunities for everyone. It recognizes that education is not only a fundamental human right, but also a key driver of progress across all the other SDGs.
It's like that old saying, give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. Teach a person to fish, you feed them for a lifetime.
Right, exactly.
But in this case, it's not just about fishing.
Right.
It's about equipping people with the knowledge and skills and values to create a better future for themselves and their communities.
Absolutely. Education empowers people. It strengthens communities. It fosters innovation. It's essential for tackling poverty, promoting health, protecting the environment.
Wow.
Building a more just and peaceful world.
So it's about way more than just getting kids into school.
It is.
Like, what does quality education even look like in this whole context of the SDGs?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The SDGs go beyond just increasing access to education.
Okay.
They emphasize the importance of quality, inclusivity, and relevance. It's not just about butts and seats.
Okay.
It's about making sure that all learners are getting an education that's actually meaningful.
Right.
And that prepares them for, the complexities of the 21st century.
So what are some of the hallmarks of quality education when we're talking about the SDGs?
Well, it definitely goes beyond just rote memorization and standardized tests.
Right.
We're talking about fostering critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, collaboration.
Yeah.
Those skills that allow people to adapt and innovate and thrive in a rapidly changing world.
It's about preparing students, not just for the workforce, but for active citizenship, for lifelong learning.
Exactly.
For engaging responsibly with a globalized world.
Absolutely. And inclusivity is another core principle.
Okay.
It's about making sure that all learners, regardless of their background, their abilities or circumstances, have equal opportunities to reach their full potential.
So we're talking about breaking down those systemic barriers.
We are.
That prevent marginalized groups from accessing quality education.
Yeah, whether those barriers are based on gender, race, ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic status, geographic location.
All of that.
It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
It's about creating an education system that values diversity, that celebrates differences.
Yes.
And that fosters a sense of belonging for all learners.
Absolutely. And recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to education.
Right.
Different learners have unique needs and strengths that need to be taken into account.
Yeah. So the SDGs are encouraging a more personalized,
they are
learner-centered approach.
Yeah, one that empowers learners to actually take ownership of their education.
So we've talked about quality, we've talked about inclusivity. What about relevance?
Right.
How do the SDGs address this need for education to be connected to the real world?
Yeah.
The challenges that we're facing today.
That's where things like sustainability, global citizenship, digital literacy come in.
Okay.
The SDGs emphasize the importance of integrating these themes into the curriculum, equipping learners with the knowledge and skills to navigate a rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
And to actually contribute to creating a more sustainable and equitable future.
It's about connecting learning to real-world issues.
It is.
To the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
Exactly. And I think there's a quote from Nabi Pillay, who's the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, that really captures this shift in thinking. She said, "We have tended to treasure what we measure. It's time now to measure what we treasure."
I love that quote.
Yeah.
It challenges us to move beyond that purely economic view of education.
It does.
And to start valuing the things that truly matter.
Yeah.
Creativity, critical thinking, empathy, compassion, collaboration, a sense of responsibility for ourselves, our communities, our planet.
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
To rethink what we prioritize and how we measure success.
And speaking of measuring what we treasure, I'm reminded of something that an educator named T. Smith, who works at the Eden Project, said. He said, if all we did was to commit ourselves to leaving this world a better place than we found it, of leading our lives, so at the end we could say, I'm glad I did. Yeah.
Rather than, I wish we would have a chance of creating a beautiful civilization.
That's beautiful.
In my view, teachers are the lodestone of society. We entrust our most valuable gift, our children and ourselves, to them. If that is so, by definition, teachers are the shapers of the future, the architects of a better world, by lighting the fires of the imagination and the gentleness of a shared humanity.
Wow, that's powerful.
It speaks to the immense responsibility that educators hold.
It does.
They're the ones who nurture young minds, inspire curiosity, and cultivate those values and skills that will determine the course of our collective journey.
Yeah, and it highlights the need for that more holistic vision of education.
Right.
One that embraces the SDGs and empowers learners to become agents of change.
And that brings up another important point.
Okay.
The SDGs are a global framework.
They are.
But how does this play out in different contexts?
Right.
How do we balance this need for global cooperation with respect for local knowledge, cultural diversity, the unique needs of different communities? That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a really important question.
Yeah.
We've been talking about these big ideas.
Yeah.
Globalization, the SDGs, different models of education.
Right.
But how does it all actually translate to the real world? How do we make sure that education is relevant and meaningful in different cultural contexts?
Yeah, it's about finding that balance, between global interconnectedness and local relevance.
Right.
The SDGs provide this kind of shared framework.
Yeah.
But the way they're implemented is going to look different in different places.
Right.
It's like having a recipe for a delicious cake.
Okay.
The basic ingredients are the same.
Yeah.
But you can adjust the flavors and the decorations to suit your own taste.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap of imposing a one-size-fits-all model of education on the whole world?
It starts with recognizing that there are many valid paths to success, many ways of knowing and learning. We need to move away from this idea that there's only one right way to educate students.
Right.
And instead embrace the diversity of human experience.
So respecting local knowledge, cultural traditions.
Yes.
The unique needs and aspirations of different learners.
Think about indigenous communities, for example.
Okay.
They have their own rich traditions of knowledge and ways of learning that have sustained them for generations.
Right.
And we need to find ways to honor those traditions.
Yeah.
While also preparing students for the challenges of a globalized world.
It's like weaving together different threads of knowledge, the local and the global, to create something that's both beautiful and strong.
I like that.
But how do we make sure that those diverse voices are actually heard and valued in a world that often prioritizes standardization and conformity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's where things like participatory approaches to education come in.
Okay.
It's about involving students, teachers, families, and communities in the design and implementation of education programs.
So it's not just about top-down policymaking.
No, it's about empowering communities to take ownership of their own education systems.
And that brings us back to that idea of education as capability.
It does.
It's about creating the conditions for individuals and communities to flourish.
Yeah.
To develop their capabilities and to exercise their agency in shaping their own destinies.
That's a good way to put it.
It's about recognizing that education is not just a one-way street.
Right.
It's a dynamic process of learning, growing, and transforming ourselves and the world around us.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Wow. This has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
As we wrap up our deep dive into globalization and education, I'm left with this sense of both the challenges and the incredible possibilities.
Yeah, me too. It's clear that globalization has had a profound impact on education. But it's not like a deterministic force.
Right.
We have choices to make.
Yeah.
And those choices will determine what kind of future we create.
So what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will kind of walk away with?
I think first, it's crucial to be critical thinkers.
Okay.
Don't just accept the dominant narratives around globalization and education at face value.
Right.
Question assumptions, challenge easy answers, consider multiple perspectives.
Like that saying, don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to think for ourselves and engage in thoughtful dialogue.
Yeah.
About the purpose of education and the kind of world we want to live in.
And second, I think it's important to remember that education is about way more than just economics.
It is.
It's about human development, social justice, the cultivation of values and capabilities that will enable people and communities to thrive in this complex and interconnected world.
Absolutely. It's about fostering creativity, critical thinking, empathy, compassion, a sense of responsibility for ourselves, our communities, and our planet.
And finally, I think it's essential to embrace the diversity of human experience.
Yeah.
And to recognize that there are many valid approaches to education. We need to find ways to respect local knowledge, cultural traditions, the unique needs and aspirations of different learners.
It's about creating a global education landscape that is both interconnected and diverse.
Yeah.
Where learners from all walks of life have the opportunity to reach their full potential and contribute to a more just and sustainable world.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into globalization and education.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for diving in with us. We hope this episode has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to continue exploring this fascinating world of education. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.